All right, so here's my learning goals. This is my job today. Hopefully, if I do my job right, we're going to succeed at these. I want all of you to be able to create a basic T table that matches your skills with the needed skills on the job description. And if that's sounding a little unfamiliar, it's an important skill to have because it is an expectation of employers these days. I want people to be able to name 3 advantages of networking. And I know a lot of people kind of roll their eyes when you talk about networking. And strangely enough, I don't like networking, and I've spent my entire career talking. But I would argue that now is the best time, especially if you're an introvert, to network. So we're going to give you some opportunities to learn about relatively painless ways of networking. Why it's important to leave off experience and qualifications that go beyond the company's needs. And that dovetails beautifully into being, overcoming that hurdle of being seen as being overqualified. And then finally, successfully keep the momentum of the job search going for as long as it takes. All righty. Is this workshop only applied to those ages 50 or over? No, not at all. As a matter of fact, when I was still teaching this face-to-face, we had a millennial come in. We loved her, she loved us, and a lot of the stuff we're going to cover today is actually going to be applicable for everybody's age. So, yeah. Okay. So let me move along. As I said, I am going to be moving along fairly quickly today, but I'm going to start with good news. I know there's a lot of bad news. We've had to deal with a lot of bad news, but before we get to the good news, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you in the chat box really, really quick. And I want to hear from you in just one word. So what I'd like you to do in the chat box, quick like a bunny, as my mentor used to say, I'd like you to describe job searching over the age of 40, 50, whatever it is, in one word. So if you could describe having to look for work at this point in one word, what would it be? Puzzling? Okay, hard, yup, frustrating. Of course, I don't need to add, don't use any words you wouldn't use in an interview. Slow, competitive, different, challenging, complex, yeah, redundant, stressful, discouraging. Yep, they're coming in. Interesting. Okay, so we are seeing some kind of positive ones. Adventure, absolutely. Intimidating. Oh, okay. Difficult, limiting, challenging, curious. Okay. It almost sounds like you're British. Curious. Okay. All right. So I'm glad that we've got kind of a mixture here. We've got a mixture of some negatives, which I had anticipated, but we're also seeing some people who are seeing the glass slightly more half full, and that's good too. So here's the thing, guys. I'm not silly enough to think that I've got, the magic bullet and I can wave a wand and make everything perfect and fantastic and everything for you. But I do feel that what we're going to focus on today is going to be some actual proven skills and proven strategies that have actually worked. And my goal today is to have you leave feeling more empowered. Is it going to be perfect? No. Is it going to be magical and wonderful and whatever? No, probably not. But I do want you to feel empowered, and that's what I'm going to be doing today. So that's my job. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I promised on sharing good news. Yes. So here we go. Harvard Business Review came out with a story that offered us some hopeful news. And that is employers are really looking for experienced workers to help them through the current crisis. And I would say that the crisis in many respects is still going on. Even though they're starting to talk about endemic and they're talking about living with what is happening, they still need people who have been to the rodeo before, if you get my meaning. What they actually finally found out is that experienced, and by the way, we could have told them this a long time ago, experienced workers have the edge over younger counterparts. They've got institutional knowledge, they have education, work experience, mature perspective, stable life stage, dedication, loyalty, you name it, we've got it. And again, back in the days when I used to do this face-to-face, we actually did an exercise where we talked about a lot of the myths that pop up around the older worker and that they don't work as hard and that they're not as loyal and they won't be around as long and that kind of thing. Every single one of those is a myth. Age does not automatically mean anything good or bad. I always say, for example, they say, well, I don't want to hire somebody who's older because they're going to leave so soon we won't be able to keep them. If actually there has been plenty of challenge in recent years with younger employees leaving companies regularly, very shortly after they're hired. So that doesn't necessarily mean that simply because somebody's younger, they're going to stick around longer. So we're myth busting here. Okay. All right. So if you want to know more about that, reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to talk to you about that. But I want to move on now to basically the bulk of what we're going to be talking about today. What has changed since last you looked for work? Now, I know some of you have been in sustained employment for decades. So this is going to be the first time that you are preparing to go on an interview in literally decades. And I'm here to tell you that there have been things that have changed, and it's to your advantage to know what has changed since last time you did this. So if you've been out of the workforce for a significant amount of time, if you've been working in sustained employment, you may find that resume writing, interviewing, the job search itself has changed. What used to work may or may not work before. I realize that probably all of us here have successfully gotten a job before, so it's tempting to think, well, I did it before, I can do it again. Again, strategies used decades before may work now, they may not. Those of you who I don't realize that we're going to get some people who in IT or whatever, that fields that typically change over, rather comparatively rapidly. So maybe some of this stuff you're going to know, but hang in there, because you're going to find some things that you hadn't thought of. We're going to be whoops, I got a little ahead of myself. Sorry. So we're going to be talking first of all about this whole idea of matching your skills directly with the skills listed on the job description. And that's probably the biggie that has changed. We're going to be talking about network. We're going to be talking, obviously, about teleconferencing. And then finally, we're going to be talking about you yourself. Oftentimes, we don't give a lot of thought to how we ourselves have changed since last time we interviewed for a job, and how those changes can affect how we self-market. And I would say that's both positive and negative. So we're going to be diving into that. So the first thing that I was talking about is this idea of matching your skills to the skills listed. Now, historically, resumes pretty much all were written chronologically, and even some of the interviews were conducted that way. So you know what I'm talking about. You list your duties of your most recent position at the top, and then you work your way down from there. Now, in this model, the responsibility was on the hiring manager to make a connection between what you'd done before and what he or she wanted you to do now. All accomplishments were pretty much considered important, even if they weren't directly relevant to the job being pursued. Basically, the idea of the resume is, look what a cool, loyal, efficient employee I am. Now, sidebar, just so that there's no misconception. Chronological resumes are still absolutely being used, and there may be times when a chronological resume will be the best format for you. But what I would suggest is reach out to a Career Force staff member and ask them to help you decide which type of resume is best telling your story. You may find that a functional resume or a skills-based resume that divide up what you've done according to skill set might be better in telling your story. Okay, we can help. But an exercise that's going to help you kind of make that determination, is going to help you write your resume, is going to help you with the interview, is this T-chart or T-table, which I absolutely adore. Okay. Now keep in mind, this is simply a preparation exercise. You do not hand this to a hiring manager. You don't email this to them or hand this over to them. This is literally something that you do at home yourself. So you start by taking a scrap piece of paper, draw a big old T on it. On the left, you're going to be listing keywords on the job description. So basically, I've literally started this by going to a job description and physically highlighting, okay, they want somebody with experience, in this example, recruiting team members, experience as a human resources business partner, experience working with various departments to determine skills. Then over on the right, you are going to write how you've actually accomplished these in your job. When you're done with this exercise, you should get a really good snapshot of how well do you fit this job. Now, as I'm sure you already know, do you need to match every single bullet point? No. And how many bullet points really ends up being a personal choice? They've done some studies and they found that men tend to not worry as much about getting all the bullet points. Women tend to be a little bit more strict on themselves and they need to, have most, if not all. Again, that's a personal choice and we can certainly help and talk you through that. My feeling about it is no, you do not have to have experience in absolutely everything, but you do need to be prepared to talk about that skill if you don't have it. Okay, so that might be an area where we can help you as well. So I'm a big fan of the T-chart and the T-table. I think it's awfully smart to start the whole process this way. And again, if you want more, if you have more questions about how to do it or whatever, please reach out because we're more than happy to help you with that. Let's move on quickly to networking, okay? Now, I'm sure you've heard this before, but I think it bears repeating because it really is important. The statistics are consistent. 75 to 80% of the jobs come from knowing somebody who knows somebody. A sobering reality is that many jobs available simply will not appear in job boards. Jobs are advertised through word of mouth, associations, company-related websites, that kind of thing. Maybe things have ticked up recently because people are really looking for people. But honestly, what I found is particularly the jobs that are well-paying are going to be found through networking. So networking and informational interviews can really help the experienced worker, especially one who has been out of the job hunting area for a long, long time. So, for example, let's say that you now want to make a career change and get into something that you've either A, never done before, got a lot of people saying, I want to do something brand new, or maybe you did what I did, which is get back into something that you hadn't done for many years. The big question for you is, do you have the skills that will make you competitive? It's not enough to just say, well, I kind of generally meet their profile. You have to remember that you're going to be going up against other people. And do you have the skills that will make you actually effectively compete with those people? The best people to give you that answer, honestly, I've always felt, are the people who are actually doing the job. Forgive me, we get a lot of emergency vehicles going by. So if you hear something in the background, that's what's going on. The best people to assist you in answering that question, do I have competitive skills, are going to be the people who are doing the work that you seek. Find those folks. Ask them to review your resume and give you candid feedback on whether they think you are out of the box ready or whether you need to get a little upskilling, okay? Networking and informational interviews can also assess whether or not you even want that career change. You may take some, you might talk to some people in the field. You may discover the new job isn't quite exactly what you wanted it to be. That's fine. You can back out of that road and head down another. And I've certainly done that as well. And finally, talking with insiders that are doing the work that you want to do will give you, basically insider tips on where to find the jobs and what specifically employers are going to want to hear. They can tell you what the important software is. They can tell you certifications that will put you over the top. They will help you with the language that you needed. When I went back into education, I kept I kept referring to myself as a teacher. And my mentor said, oh, no, 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 no. You want to go for training jobs. Now you are a trainer or you are an instructor. When you say the word teacher, people tend to think public school or, whatever. Okay, so that's that. Oh, another advantage to networking is that you can find out about jobs before they are posted. So insiders can sometimes share things like, well, okay, there's nothing in the department right now, but I can tell you we're budgeting for a position. It sounds like they should know more in April. Okay, so that's the other thing of getting to know people in the field that you want to get in. And finally, more experienced workers are choosing to focus on a specific company or organization rather than waiting for the jobs to be posted. So a lot of people find that a very engaging exercise to do right now is think about, if I had my way, where would I be working? What organization would I be working for? Think about that company that interests you, research it thoroughly, review your qualifications, especially the skills that are going to be valuable during this particular time of rebuilding, and then reach out and meet them. It could be, as simple as just a call or an email. Let them know you were simply opening the door for a possible relationship. You're not expecting them to create a position for you right away. Honestly, the better and more positive the interaction is, the better chance you're going to have of having them reach out to you in the future. Okay? So those are the biggies as to why you should be thinking about networking. All righty. I said I was going to move quickly. I'm moving quickly, guys, because I want to get to those questions. And it sounds like you guys have got some questions already, and so that's excellent. We're going to move for them. All right, but let's talk about what else has changed. Teleconferencing. Now, a lot of people have much, much, much more experience teleconferencing than they did when I was actually writing this for the first time, which is a good thing. Because I think, honestly, the more comfortable you are with teleconferencing, it's going to be easier for you. Now, what I hear is that it's kind of a mixed bag, that there are places out there that are having people come in face to face. So I can't really tell you where that falls right now, but I do know that teleconferencing is still being used just because they're finding it's efficient all the way across the board. Okay, so let's see here. I want to talk a little bit about basic tips, okay? If you need more assistance, we certainly will go through that. So the good news is you're doing it now. You probably have done it before. The more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to feel. Set up your background. Now, this I think is really interesting. You've probably seen and possibly have even used the fake backgrounds that are now available. So as you probably know, you can make an adjustment on your screen so that you're sitting in the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, or you're sitting in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, or whatever. Just so you know, employers don't like those. And I don't blame them. They do look a little fake. And if you've ever seen anybody move to the side really quickly, half their face disappears. Generally speaking, a real background is better. It's warmer. It makes you look authentic. I would say keep the background simple. A good rule of thumb is simply do not have anything around you that is going to draw focus away from you. So if you have a painting behind you that's really, really, really hard to understand, you don't want them to constantly looking behind you going, is that a duck, or is that a... You want to make sure that it's fairly simple in the background. You want to make sure that your lighting is good. Now, I always struggle in this room because this room tends to be a little dark. On stormy days today, it's even more dark, so I apologize. It's probably a little darker than I wish it would be. But you want to make sure that you're lit well. You don't want to sit right in front of a window because then you're going to be in silhouette. You don't want to be right beside a really bright light source or you're going to get washed out. You can, if you wish, and I have in this room, I almost had to, buy a selfie light. They're not that expensive. And by the way, I don't want anybody feeling that a takeaway from this webinar is go out and buy stuff, because you don't have to. If you choose to, they aren't that expensive. Same way with, well, I guess I'm going to be talking about audio in a minute. Okay, so choose good lighting. Dress as you would face-to-face. And I do encourage people to dress even down, including the shoes. Why? Psychological. You're going to feel differently if you've got the entire interview outfit on, as opposed to whether you were simply dressing for interview from the waist up. So I do encourage you to do the whole thing. Good eye contact and smiling, absolutely. Now, eye contact with teleconferencing can be challenging because we are so used to looking at the screen, and more specifically about the middle of the screen, that we're actually looking several inches down. What you want to be doing is you want to be looking into the camera lens, because that is the eyes of the person who is interviewing you. And honestly, I've experienced this. Making eye contact or fake eye contact over teleconferencing has the same psychological impact on the listener as making real eye contact. I have had meetings with people where they've been staring down at the screen through the whole thing, and then all of a sudden something reminded them and they looked into the camera, and all of a sudden they're looking right at me, and it was wonderful. It was a positive experience when they made eye contact. So the other cool thing about teleconferencing is you can put up a little cheats that you couldn't normally do if it was face to face. So yeah, can you put a little post-it note with a big arrow pointing to the camera lens and saying, look here, smile? Absolutely. Go ahead and do that. And that's an advantage. Okay. All right. I mentioned audio super quickly. Audio really depends on your system. We found here, even at CareerForce, what works for one person won't necessarily work for the other. So I would honestly say practice this, test it out, find out whether it's a headset, whether it's simply the mic in your laptop, what it is. Again, I'll remind you, you don't have to go out and buy a bunch of expensive equipment. In fact, I wouldn't if you're only going to use it for interviewing, but just make sure that your audio is good and they can hear you well. Okay, and the last thing that I want to throw out here, guys, if you remember nothing else from this section, remember this one. Always have a backup phone number for whoever you're speaking with, because things have occasionally gone awry. Wi-Fi connections do drop out. In fact, Marnie and I were talking about this at the beginning today, and I've been having a problem in this location. After months and months and months of going through these with no problem, I've frozen up a couple of times, and poor Marnie's had to take over. So make sure that you have a backup phone number to talk to folks. All right, again, moving along quickly so that we have time for questions. The final thing that may have changed since you last interviewed is you. So I'd like you to take some time to think a little bit about the following. How do you feel about looking for employment now? And do these feelings show? Now, of course, if you're really enthusiastic about the idea, if you're thinking this is a new chapter and you're excited, well, that's fantastic to let that show. Go for it. But if your feelings are negative, if you still have emotional leftovers from your last employment or resentment about having to look now, this could be a problem. It's recommended that you reach out to somebody in your life that you trust, somebody who's going to be straightforward with you. Ask them if they're picking up on any bitterness or resentment or struggles to move on. And then if they do find that they are picking up on some of that, feel welcome to reach out to us. We have got all kinds of ways of being able to answer questions like, why did you leave your last position? And things like that, that can be difficult to answer. And we can teach you ways that you can answer these questions in a neutral, honest way that can be significantly less intimidating for you. Okay, so that's a really good assessment right there. Is how do you feel about the process? Because I was a little amazed back when we used to do face-to-face mock interviews. I was amazed at the number of people who would come in. Their bitterness was kind of coming off of them in waves, and unfortunately, that's going to make things significantly difficult for you. Okay, evaluate your skills. You've accumulated many skills, both on the job and just plain living. The last job that I had right before this was actually in the for-profit world. It was a tech company, and I was working with everybody who was less than half my age. The reason they wanted me to bring me in, honestly, was my experience. The fact that, unlike a lot of my younger counterparts, I had had years of experience of being adaptable, of realizing that life is going to throw something into the works and totally dismantle everything that you've done, and you need to be able to shift and adapt and move on fairly quickly. And they had a group of young people who were extremely good and smart, but they just, I guess, hadn't had a lot of experience with that. So they needed somebody to be kind of a mentor in that area. So think about and most of these are going to be people skills. Think about the things that you do naturally, that you learn just from living and being to rodeo after rodeo after rodeo, that you can bring to that team, that is going to be helpful. What makes you a better candidate today than you were the last time? What have you learned or gotten better at, maybe, that the younger employees have led to learn? Again, this is the idea of thinking about the people skills that you have, the ability you now have to make a connection with customers that maybe you didn't have decades ago simply because you hadn't practiced. Think about all the things you have learned on the job that you could possibly argue that you learned because you were on the job. And finally, what are your goals? Now, here's a tricky thing, because a lot of people will say this gets a little difficult when you are an older worker. They're almost certain to ask you about this, and it's going to be really important that you have a specific answer. Now, your goal may be to retire in 3 years, but I would advise you to work with us on the answer so that you're being honest, but at the same time, you're not automatically taking yourself out of contention. Okay. So as I said, that can be a tricky one. And honestly, that becomes a case by case thing where it's a little difficult to answer that, with a one size fits all. All right, really quickly, let me go through some mistakes commonly made before we open it up for questions. Now, these are mistakes that employers have shared with us, and they tell us these are the mistakes they see experienced workers making. Common stumbling blocks are being seen as overqualified. Yep, everybody kind of knows that. Losing momentum, letting your narrative be negative, and not updating your skills. So let's go through those really, really quickly here. Being seen as overqualified. The most common reason candidates are perceived to be overqualified is that they have listed too many accomplishments on their resume, or they've listed accomplishments and skills that are unrelated to the jobs that are open. Now, remember, the first entity that looks at your resume these days is going to be a robot. They are looking for skills match. And if you have your resume listing all kinds of skills that are genuinely great, but they don't match the skills that are on the job description, the robot isn't going to care. The robot isn't going to care how wonderful you are. They are going to reject the resume on the basis of that alone. Okay. The other thing too, though, is that you can also, by putting in irrelevant or stuff that is done at a higher pay grade, the human being can actually misinterpret this as well. So let me give you an example. A former restaurant manager who genuinely wants to obtain a position as a cook. They've done the management thing. They've been there, done that. They don't want to do it anymore. They just want to focus on the food. Now, they might be sending the wrong message if their resume includes accomplishments like reducing operating costs. Okay? The hiring manager reading this might be tempted to worry about that this person is going to offer advice to her boss about how the kitchen is to be run. Better bet for her to focus exclusively on the skills they say they need and leave all of the other stuff that was achieved at a higher level off. And I'm guessing that in this particular situation, a skills-based resume is going to be better, where you're saying, you need this, great, I've got it, here's how. You need this, great, I've got it, here's how. You need this, great, I've got it, here's how. Okay? So that can really be a stumbling block right there. And this, by the way, has been proven. This isn't just a theory. This has actually been proven that when people take the extra stuff out of their resumes, that's when they get the job. It's also smart to think carefully about including unrelated accomplishments as well. Okay, so let's say you've got a really vibrant volunteer effort going in your neighborhood where you're creating philanthropy models and you've won awards and local TV has done stories about you. Okay, great. The problem with talking about that could be that the job that they are going to want you to do is sit at a computer all day long. And could you be inadvertently sending out the message, I need to be engaged, I need to be creative, and I need to be physically active? So think about the other stuff that you're putting in your resume and how could they possibly interpret that in a way that you don't want them to. Okay, now moving on to the interview itself. Now, this is another proven thing. The important thing to remember, now I'm Generation X, so we are the famous lone wolves. I'm speaking in generalities, by the way. Obviously, we are all different, and there's exceptions to every rule. But in general, Generation X has got a reputation as being, tell us what you want us to do, and we're going to go do it. The important thing to remember is that the folks who are going to be interviewing us increasingly are going to be millennials and going to be Generation Z. Okay? These generations tend to, and again, there's exceptions to every rule, but in general, these generations tend to be highly collaborative, much more so than we were, okay? If you've been the boss for many years, it can be really easy to slip into boss mode and speak as you did when you were in charge. That can be, I'm not saying it's definite, but it can be, it can come across as threatening or off-putting. Now, you may be like me. Now, for a long, long time, I speak with confidence. I've learned it. I was a speech teacher. I've been an actor all of my life. It just kind of comes naturally to me. If you speak with confidence, sometimes confidence can be misunderstood as being somebody who won't listen to teammates or welcome their point of view. So it can be a tricky line to walk again. So mock interviewing is a great way to practice how you speak, how you're listening to them, how you can come across as somebody who is interested in being part of their team, and not just somebody who wants to come in and show them how it's done. Okay. And again, this is something that has been proven effective. So reach out to us if you feel that mock interviewing or just walking through how to answer some of these questions would benefit you. Please do. All right, losing momentum. So one of the biggest challenges that people report in looking for work as an experienced worker is just running out of steam. Many seekers share that they start out and they got loads of enthusiasm and motivation and organization and goals, and family commitments suddenly start popping up. Frustration gets the better of them. They just kind of lose their drive. So if you're determined to obtain employment, make goals for yourself now, but also seek out a support network that will help you stick to that plan. I always recommend thinking of it as a marathon rather than a sprint. And just like a marathon runner needs hydration and fuel all the way through the race, you will too. Now, you may snag a position shortly, and that's excellent. Don't beat yourself up, though, if you don't. These are challenging times all the way across the board, and it requires a lot of strength. All right, we talked a little bit about this before. Let's dig into it a little bit quicker before we wrap up to the questions. A common mistake is unintentionally coming across as negative. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have some residual bitterness regarding a former employer, seek assistance in finding truthful, neutral language to use when talking about them. If a new employer gets the impression that they're interviewing a really judgmental person who's sitting there with lots of emotional baggage, it's going to be natural for them to choose the other candidate who's excited and positive and enthusiastic about the new opportunity. Now, by the way, this is not to say that you have to create fake excitement. They will spot that immediately. But I always say leave the baggage at the door, bring into the door your skills, your accomplishments, and your interest in the company. Be careful about word choice. The words fired and laid off are not interchangeable. Laid off means you lost your job because your organization closed, restructured, downsized, moved, or there was no longer a need to your particular position. A lot of people have been laid off due to COVID. There is nothing to be ashamed of. It's happening all over the place. And you don't need to get into the weeds. You can say, there was a restructure. My job was eliminated. I was laid off because of COVID. The word fired is very negative, and it can frequently just kind of add anxiety to the person who feels like they need to describe what happened. I would suggest a more neutral term, involuntary separation, and I would highly encourage you to overcome the understandable discomforts. Work with us, reach out to us. We have found again and again and again that once we start talking to people about this, they realize it isn't nearly as insurmountable or frightening as it became. If you were fired, do not represent yourself as laid off, because employers do background checks. They can discover the truth pretty quickly. Honestly, being fired happens more than you think. And there are lots of ways of talking about it in a neutral, kind of emotion-free way that is honest, and they're not nearly as interested as long as they're reassured that whatever happened will not happen with them. You would be surprised that they're willing to move on. Okay, the last thing that employers will say that the experienced employees make a mistake on is not updating their skills, okay? So if you've been employed with the same organization for 30 years, you have a solid set of skills that your particular organization needed you to have. However, when you go out exploring other organizations, you may find that other skills might be needed. Sometimes it's just not enough. to be willing to learn. Think about it. A hiring manager has two candidates. One candidate says, well, I may not have personal experience with this particular software, but I'm certainly willing to learn. The other candidate, however, says, yes, I've used this software for the past 3 years in my previous position, and here are my specific accomplishments using that software. The importance of that software can decide who gets the job. Now, you might be interested in going back to work that you did many years ago, depending upon the nature of the work. Even a degree may not entirely be what you need to be qualified for. I'm going to use myself as an example. Now, I have a degree and a teaching license in teaching public education. Okay, that's great. But I can't rely only on that degree, because the fact of the matter is that, as we all know, and certainly parents and grandparents know this as well, teaching and how we teach our kids and where we teach our kids has been turned inside out. So the fact of the matter is, if I want to apply for a high school teaching position, I better make sure that I have solid skills and proven skills in making dynamic content remotely. Okay. So where can we help you? We have the Dislocated Worker Services Program. So if you have short-term training that you need to get a license, to get a certification, we can help you with that. We did, during the height of the pandemic, actually have a great partnership with Coursera. I don't think that there is any particular special going on now with Coursera, but keep an eye on it. It's a great program that offers university classes. And we can certainly help you with that as well. Okay, only went off about a few minutes, but we are now going to spend the rest of the time answering questions. And I know, Marnie, you've been extremely busy during the last 40 minutes, so you got anything left for me?
Yes. Well, just right off the bat, I'm going to paste in the information about Coursera. It's currently about free access to the 5 Grow with Google professional certificate programs.
Okay.
And so if folks are interested in that, they can click on there, or if you just go to careerforcemn.com and you put the word Coursera into the search bar, you'll find that page. It will tell you all about it and what to do. Okay? And of course, if you have any questions, you can ask us. All right, let's start out. Can you, Robin, share your thoughts about following up with employers after you've applied for positions? Any best practices you can offer on this?
I need a little bit more information. What do you mean about following up? Are you talking about asking how the interview went, or are you talking about following up when they've already not chosen you? Do we have any more information there?
Just after they've applied. So after application,
okay,
follow-up advice to employers or to applicants following up to prospective employers.
Okay. So I'm assuming you mean that this is, you've applied and then you waited and you waited and you haven't heard anything. Yeah, I would say, first of all, don't necessarily, unless it's a small organization, chances are, just general questions about, what should I do now? I haven't heard can be asked with somebody in HR. So I wouldn't necessarily go to the hiring manager. I would probably go to HR, and just if you have any questions about, I haven't heard anything and I'm just wondering how I should proceed at that time. I think that's the answer that helps you.
I think so. Okay. What do you say when an employer is asking you how long you'd be planning to stay?
Yeah, that's tough, because those are, and we've been asked questions about how do we deal with questions where we think there might be a little age discrimination behind it. And I always say first to people, don't immediately assume that there is ulterior motives. A lot of times we tend to assume that everybody who is conducting an interview is really good at conducting interviews, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes that they are kind of clumsy in asking the question, kind of like clumsy like me answering this question. Marty knows.
Okay,
Anyway,
so
but here's the thing is I would say honestly to say, to ask something about, well, tell me a little bit more about your job and your expectations so I get a better idea why you asked that question. Okay? There might be some really specific ideas that they have where they really need somebody to commit for a certain amount of time, or they're going to choose the person who can commit for 5 years or 3 years or whatever it is. So I think being able to say, well, could you tell me a little bit about the future of this position and why you were looking for that information, and just get more information. Because
yep,
oftentimes that, don't you find, Marty, sometimes when you ask for a little more information, they realize that they asked the question kind of clumsily and they were digging for something else. Does that make
absolutely. And
sense at
I
all?
think sometimes that question comes from experiences that they've had. Say they've
Yes.
been burned. They've been
Yep.
burned because something didn't work out or somebody got a better offer or whatever happened. Because it is true, it is far more likely if you are from a younger generation that you have no qualms about saying, I'm getting paid more or I have more vacation offered to me over here. I'm sorry that we're still onboarding, but I'm out. I'm done. I'm
Hmm.
going with this other company. And so that could be their motivation behind asking you.
Yep.
Okay. Um, just to dig in a little bit further on the previous question about follow-up. So, so many things are submitted online, and it seems like our application just goes into this big cyber void.
Hmm.
How do you how do you even like logistically follow up? How do you figure out how to do it?
Well, first of all, I think that you can be a little, first of all, proactive. And I would honestly encourage you to do some networking within the organization. If you really like that organization, if this is more than just simply another job possibility, I would suggest that you try to network within that organization. The other thing that I would also do is I'm a big fan of Glassdoor.com just because they have been adding a lot of very helpful information about the interview process. And I would say look up the company first and find out. They've got a reputation. You apply for them and you don't hear anything. This is what you do. Or if you don't hear from any, don't panic because this is what's happening. I personally am not ever. I got over the fear of this a long time ago. Thank goodness. I'm just calling up and talking to HR and just saying, and literally I have asked the first person who answers the phone, this is the information that I'm seeking. Who should I speak with? What is your recommendation? And I have never been, nobody's ever gotten upset. Nobody's ever deliberately sent me to the wrong people. I haven't run into gatekeepers. If I'm simply seeking information about their interview process. Remember, guys, this is, they need people. Employers are going to be extremely accommodating for candidates. That's not encouraging people to exploit that, but just remember, they're not going to be rude to you. This is not the time for them to be rude to you at this point.
Right. So, in a specific situation, Robin, where somebody knows that they are very qualified for a position, they've applied and have not heard from a company, they're thinking now it could be because of how they did their resume. Should they resubmit a new one and hope?
Yeah, I don't think there's any problem with that. And here's my rationale. I think this would probably be a phone call. And again, it may not work. You may get no, but then, you're definitely not going to get anywhere if you don't try. And I think this question came up like over a year ago, when I was doing this class. And is it ever okay to resend to resume? Yeah, you know what? Your resume is telling your story. And if you're coming from them just saying, honestly, guys, I don't think that you guys got the best view of what I'm capable of doing. May I please give you an updated resume? Again, the worst case scenario is they say, no, thank you. They may say, well, we've moved on in the process, but we may have another position like this opened up soon. Please send it to us because we would love to consider you. So yeah, there's nothing. Remember, your resume is your marketing document. It's your story. Absolutely. If you feel like you've got a better way of telling your story, go for it.
Yep. So we are seeing positions that have been posted and open for more than 30 days, for more than 60 days, for for a long time because they are just having a really hard time getting what they're calling qualified candidates, right? So the follow-up that you all are asking about is so important. Um, so somebody's kind of asking these almost rhetorical sounding questions, but I feel like it can't be talked about enough. Is it
Okay.
true that the hiring process is broken? Is it true that 80% of jobs are never listed? Is networking really the answer to the problem?
Absolutely. Honestly, talking to people, absolutely. I mean, even what Marnie was saying just a couple seconds ago about these positions that are open and open and open and open, sometimes it's a company where they really don't know what they want the position to be. I ran into this. I actively pursued a company years ago that I really, really wanted to because the job, as they listed it, was something I desperately wanted to do. The problem was that, and it was a small company, so the woman who owned the company was pretty much running things with a few handful of people. She wasn't 100% sure where she wanted the company to go, and consequently, she wasn't sure what she wanted the job to do. So here's the other thing. Human beings are behind this, and they can change their mind, and they can be unsure, and they can be looking down. And we saw this a lot about a year ago. I ran into so many people. It seemed to happen to project managers. Poor things. They would actually be offered the job, and then the job would be taken away because things changed again and all of that kind of thing. So, yeah, you never. I wouldn't say that the system is broken. I would say the system is showing the natural reaction to a world turned upside down. Nothing is the way that it used to be. And I think people are scrambling to try to figure out how do we do this? And you can make the best plans, and then you get an Omicron that suddenly inserts itself into reality, and all those plans go crumbling. So honestly, guys, I don't think that there's anything broken. I think that we're just desperately trying to figure out how to rebuild.
And use the information that you're given, right? So we talked about logistics a little bit ago. I'm going to use the example of state positions. I've seen a lot of them reposted, and they will specifically say, this posting is being relisted. And it will say, if you applied during this time, no need to reapply. But almost every one of those jobs that I've seen has given you a person with a name and a phone number and an email address that you could reach out to specifically and say, hey, I applied in the first round and I really thought that I met all the minimum qualifications, but I never got an interview. Could I ask you about why I shouldn't reapply? Or, could I ask you why this is being reposted? Or just any sort of networking. So any sort of question. And so that leads us
Absolutely.
into the next topic. In an extroverted world, and in an extroverted type activity like networking,
Hmm.
Robin,
Hmm. Hmm.
what advice do you have for a very introverted person that is so just intimidated and paralyzed by the idea that I have to network in order to get my next job?
Support system. Support in the form of career force, support in the form of friends and family members who can kind of guide you through. Sometimes, yeah, I mean, the thing about it is the nasty thing about having to look for jobs is that we're all expected to do things that we don't necessarily want to do or that don't come naturally, and we're going to try to avoid them. With some people, it might be being detail oriented and taking the time to write that resume. With others, such as yourself, it's reaching out to people when you would really rather die than do so. So honestly, a lot of times it comes down to simply, okay, I'm told that this is good for me. I'm told that I'm going to have greater success. Now I need somebody to kind of help me take that step. And I'm certainly willing to do that. Goodness knows I've done that. Marty's done that. And just say, okay, so your assignment this week is you're going to send an email to this person. You're going to ask these questions. And it can simply start you down that road, and it can be literally something as simple as that. Okay. The important thing is, when you're dealing with avoidance, and that's what we're talking about here. You're talking about avoidance because it's not a natural thing. treat it like when it comes to Robin eating fruit instead of eating a candy bar. I literally need to, I don't know, text somebody like Marnie and say, okay, what do I do? What do I do? But seriously, I joke, but I'm actually very serious that in changing these behaviors and to deal with avoidance, you just gotta take it one step at a time.
Absolutely. So,
Oh, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Marnie.
well, I was going to say one of my first call this morning was to somebody who was waiting for their reemployment session. And she was so scared because at age 61, her whole plan had changed. She was going to work until she was 70. She loved the company, and now just things have changed. And
Yep.
and so, as a lot of us women do, I know I do it, I get so frustrated and angry and upset and nervous that I cry. Okay. But let's say that you are angry, you are raging, you are livid about the situation because it is not fair. What advice do you have for folks who are dealing with that? How do they not come across negative when they're dealing with so many betrayal and just
Hmm.
unfairness?
Absolutely. So again, this is where I suggest that people reach out if you've got somebody in your private life who you know is willing to listen and kind of tell you how it is. This person can be very, very helpful where they can tell you kind of where they see you on the spectrum of, yeah, you're kind of bitter, Robin, and it's showing, but I don't think it's that bad yet. I think there's just word changes here and remembering to smile. There's that. And then there is, no, this is way deep, too deep. This is getting in way too deep, and I can't turn it on and turn it off like a faucet. That might mean that you get some help elsewhere that happens in conjunction with the job search. And that certainly is a reality as well. I mean, you pick up a news source these days, they're going to be talking about the instances of mental health issues going up. People are sick and tired of it. People's lives have been upended. So I would say it's a really good time to have a candid conversation with somebody. And if you need that to be us, we're certainly, I mean, we're not therapists, but we can give you our professional opinion as to whether what you describe to us seems like something you can fix on your own or whether you're going to need some help. But that might mean, yeah, that you work hand in hand with a counselor, with a therapist, with somebody to deal with this, because you're right. Sometimes things are just they go too deep. You can't just flip it on like a switch. Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Say,
I know.
I want
Go
to
ahead.
jump to a question just that popped up because we've got 4 minutes and I want to get to it. Our professional resume write is worth the expense. I want Marty to weigh in on this as well, because my personal experience is 50-50. And I'll tell you the person who was really good for it. The very first person who ever wrote a resume for me was fantastic. And I used that resume literally for decades. And the reason she was fantastic is she literally spent hours with me. She had me come in, I think, 2 full hour-long sessions. Maybe they were longer, I don't remember now. But she got to know everything about me. And it wasn't just what I'd accomplished. She got to know my personality. She got to know what I like to do on my hobbies and my private life. She knew me so well that she wrote this resume that even looked like my personality. Okay. It even had a format that looked like me. Okay. Um, Years and years and years later, she had kind of gone off my life. She wasn't available anymore. I knew that I needed a new one. It was looking a little dated. I needed to upgrade it. And so I went for just kind of a random company. Ugh. Honestly, without half trying, I could have written a better resume than they wrote for me. And I really resented it because that was a lot of money that I spent and got nothing. So what I would say is it gets down to, I think it's a personal choice, but I would say you need to interview them just as much as they talk to you before you make a decision to lay down that cash. I would strongly suggest find out, how do you prepare? What do you guys do in order to get to know me as the candidate, in order to write my resume accordingly? How much do you dig? What questions do you ask? And find that out.
I would agree with all of that. As Robin said earlier in the hour, we're not here to suggest that any unemployed person dole out cash. for a service like this. That's your call to make. But there are a bunch of folks that, you know, as part of our government have decided to do this public service, and it is our job to help you with your resume. Now, there are people of many, many different backgrounds. Robin came from teaching, instructing, acting. I came from community development. You know, there's a smattering of different places people have come from. So it is kind of like seeking a therapist or something. When you seek a resume writer, you need to find somebody who is invested in you and committed to collaboratively building a resume with you, by you, because it needs to be in your voice. Unfortunately, no resume writer or help, your brother, your sister, your mom, nobody's going to be able to go into that interview with you and sell that. So ultimately, I want you to be confident with your resume. So
Absolutely, because it's your story. And by the way, as we always joke here, you know, you show your resume to 5 people and you get 5 different opinions on whether it's good. The bottom line, the only thing that matters is if you feel good with it. You guys, it's 11 o'clock. It's time to go. Okay, so here's the thing. It turns out in the last couple of weeks, I have been available for one-to-one consultations on Thursdays. And so Marty, I believe, is regularly available for consultations on Thursdays as well. Marty is working out of the office in St. Cloud. I work out of the office in Bloomington. So reach out to us if you would like to work with us one-to-one. I am going to be sending you a packet of stuff that will give you the notes for this, and it will give you all kinds of other stuff so you can reach out to me there too. Let this be the beginning of the conversation. Don't let it be the end. We are here to help you, and thank you so much for being here, guys. You're fantastic.